What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. For this video I have two very similar action cameras. I have the Firefly XS and the Firefly X. And there are three main differences in between these two action cameras. The first main difference is the price. So if you're looking to buy the Firefly XS, you're gonna have to spend somewhere between $200 to $250. Where the Firefly X you can find for around $160. So this one is the cheaper one. The second main difference in between these two has to do with the IP rating. So with the Firefly X we get an IP66 rating. And even though you're not going to be able to dive with this without a case, you can basically have this camera in rain, you can spray it with water and nothing will happen to it. Where with the Firefly XS you're gonna need the waterproof case in case you wanna get this wet. So that's the second difference in between these two. And the third main difference, and probably the biggest difference in between these two action cameras, is the field of view that we get with each camera. So with the Firefly XS we get a field of view of 90 degrees, where with the Firefly X we get a field of view of 170 degrees. So if you don't like that fisheye effect that we usually get with action cameras, you're probably gonna like the Firefly XS more. Personally, I do prefer the one with a wider field of view, so the Firefly X. And just so I can give you an example, so you can see the difference between 170 and a 90 degree field of view. I have a couple of recordings that I've done with the Firefly X, so what you're seeing on the screen right now. And this recording was done in 4K at 30 frames per second. And the second recording you're gonna be seeing is from the Firefly XS, so with the 90 degree field of view. So this is the main difference in between these two action cameras. Aside from that, they're both fairly similar. I mean, they can both do 4K at 60 frames per second, even though if you're recording in 4K at 60 frames per second, you don't get image stabilization. So you're only getting image stabilization if you're recording at 4K at 30 frames per second or other lower resolutions. And since we're talking about image stabilization, why don't I show you some recordings that I've done so you can see how the image stabilization works while walking, running, biking, etc. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back. Alright, and we're moving on to another quick test for image stabilization. So for this test I'm gonna be running a bit just so you can see how the camera does while running. So yeah, this is how a 4K 30 frames per second recording would look like if you're running and you have the electronic image stabilization turned on. Alright, for our next recording I'm doing 4K 30 frames per second, and for this recording I have the image stabilization turned on. I'm gonna try to do some more sudden movements so you can see how the image stabilization does. Of course I'm riding the bicycle and it's also pretty windy around here. So yeah, this is how a 4K 30 frames per second recording done with the Firefly X would look like with the image stabilization turned on and on the bicycle. So as you've seen for yourself, the image stabilization works and it's good to have it, but this is definitely not the best image stabilization that I've ever seen on an action camera. I've also noticed that whenever you're doing more sudden movements, the image stabilization can't exactly keep up with your movement. So yes, the image stabilization works, but I have seen somewhat better on other action cameras in the past. Both cameras can also take external microphones. So we have a USB-C port on the side on both cameras and you can use an external microphone with them. But the internal microphones on these cameras are some of the best internal microphones that I've heard on any action camera. So next I want to show you a couple of examples so you can see how the internal microphone on these cameras sound like. Alright, this is a quick microphone test with the Firefly X. For this recording I'm riding a bicycle once again, as you can probably see, and I'm recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. At this resolution I also have the image stabilization turned on. So this is how the internal microphone on this action camera would sound like. This is our second audio test with the Firefly X. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can probably see for yourself, I am inside the car, so it's nice and quiet here. I have this window open, but all the other windows are closed, so no wind or any other noise, so you should only be able to hear my voice. So this is how the internal microphone on this action camera sounds like under these conditions. And as you've heard for yourself, the internal microphones do get pretty decent sound, and probably better than a lot of other action cameras that I've tried in the past. Alright, and we are moving on to video quality. The video quality is decent and probably better than a lot of action cameras that I've tried, but I don't think the video quality is as good as you'd get from the E4K Plus, for example. I personally prefer the footage that I would get from the E4K Plus. And with that being said, I'm going to show you a bunch of recordings that I've done during the day. Most of them were done with the Firefly X. So I have some footage in 4K at 30, some footage at 4K at 60, and so on. So let's check out those recordings and I'll be right back. And we are moving on to our next recording. For this recording I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and now it is a bit more windy. So we're gonna walk up to here. We're gonna stop here and pan right slowly. And back left. So there is a bit of wind, some traffic, and that water all the way up there. So you may hear that noise as well. So this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second from the Firefly X would look like. We are moving on to a 1080p recording. For this recording I'm doing 1080p at 60 frames per second, and of course at this resolution, as you can probably see for yourself, we have image stabilization. The camera can also do 1080p at 120 frames per second, and of course 1080p at 30 frames per second. But for 1080p at 120 frames per second recordings, we do not get image stabilization. So yeah, this is how recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second on the Firefly X would look like. Hey Lexi.
Yeah?
What you doing?
Feeding chicken. Wow, they sure like it.
Mm-hmm.
This'll help. Yeah.
They stole it.
They stole it from me.
We are moving on to another quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. As you can probably see for yourself, for this recording I am inside the car, and I also wanted to let you know that the camera supports a dash cam mode. So in the dash cam mode, the camera basically starts and stops recordings whenever you turn on and off the vehicle. So yeah, this is how a recording inside the car would look like if you're filming with the windows closed and almost no noise, and of course in 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, this is a quick recording with the Firefly X, and for this recording I'm doing 4K at 60 frames per second. However, at this resolution, this action camera doesn't have image stabilization, therefore I am using a gimbal for this recording. It's also kind of windy, so you're probably gonna hear a lot of wind as well. As you can probably see for yourself, I am also riding a bicycle. So I'll turn right somewhere around here. And we'll keep going straight. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 60 frames per second would look like if you are using the Firefly X. And as you've seen for yourself, the daytime recordings do look quite good. The colors look very natural, the video sharpness is good, and even the dynamic range is quite good. So I can't really say that they have bad video quality for daytime recordings. We also have some features like an upside down mode. So if you're recording upside down, you can just switch the camera to that mode. We have a dash cam mode, and that means that you can use the camera as a dash cam in your car. And the cameras can also do time lapses at the press of a button. So you select how long you want the time lapse, you select how many seconds in between clips, and then the camera can do a time lapse video by itself. And of course, this was a quick example of a time lapse video that I've done with this camera. An important thing to notice is the fact that you can charge the camera while recording, and that's good if you're doing a time-lapse, for example. So you can plug in like a power bank, and then camera's battery is not gonna die. Talking about that, The batteries in these two cameras aren't that great. I mean, you're gonna get somewhere around 35 to 45 minutes if you're recording in 4K. And I think that's lower than most action cameras that I've been trying in the past year, a year and a half. So the battery life on these isn't great. So you may wanna buy yourself an additional battery. Alright, we're moving on to see some nighttime recordings. For nighttime recordings, the footage isn't horrible, but it's definitely not perfect. But it's better than a lot of action cameras that I've seen in the past. So let's check out those recordings that I have at nighttime, and I will be right back. Alright, we are moving on to a quick recording in low light with the Firefly X. For this recording, of course, I'm doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can probably see for yourself, I am walking fairly slow. Now, looking on the screen here, I can't see that much, but definitely better than a lot of other action cameras that I've tried in the past. So we're gonna get here where it's a bit darker. We'll see how the camera does around here. So I'm gonna stop here for a second. We'll pan left slowly. And back right. So basically towards the light. So yeah, this is how recording from the Firefly X would look like in low light. And for our second and last recording in low light, I found another darker spot. And looking on the screen here, I can barely see anything. So we'll just turn around towards the light basically. So yeah, this is how a 4K 30 frames per second recording done on the Firefly X would look like. I also have the image stabilization turned on. So as you've seen for yourself, the nighttime recordings are far from perfect, but definitely better than a lot of other action cameras that I've tried in the past. Alright, and now taking a closer look at the cameras themselves. As I said earlier, they do look very similar, and the only difference is the lens basically. So the lenses are different, but other than that we have the same button. So we have the same recording button at the top, the same power button on the side. At the bottom we have a 1/4 inch screw hole and a little plastic door that covers the battery. And on the other side we basically have another plastic door that covers the USB-C port and the slot for the SD card. These cameras can take SD cards up to 128 gigs, but personally I've only tried 64 gig SD cards in them. And I will leave a link to those SD cards in the video description just in case you don't know what SD card to get for your camera. On the back we have touch screens, but unfortunately the touch screens don't have the best touch sensitivity, and even though the screens do look quite good, they get bright enough for the outdoors, the touch sensitivity is definitely not the best that I've tried. In the boxes you're gonna find basically the same accessories, but with the Firefly XS you're also gonna get the waterproof case. With the Firefly X you don't get a waterproof case. But other than that, everything in the box is the same. Like most action cameras today, these can be controlled from your smartphone over Wi-Fi. So they make a Wi-Fi network, you connect to that Wi-Fi network, and of course you're gonna have to install an app on your smartphone, and then you can start, stop recordings, you can view the files that you have on the cameras, and of course you can change settings. And they also support a Bluetooth connectivity, so you'd use that if you're using like a remote control or something like that. So overall, the Firefly X at $160, it has a decent price, I would say, for what it offers. But this one for around $250, I'm not sure if I want to spend that much money on this camera. For about $299, I can already get a GoPro 8. So I feel that this one is a bit too expensive for what it is. Alright guys, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer whatever questions you may have. If you did like the video, don't forget to press that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.